They fined me $2,500 for fishing in my own lake. My own lake. According to Karen, the HOA president was illegally fishing in community waters. But something about her story felt off. Why was she so obsessed with stopping me from using the property I legally owned? What I discovered about this woman's real scheme will shock you. She thought I'd just roll over and pay the fine. Big mistake. If you've ever been bullied by someone in power, stick around because this revenge story might just make your day. You ever have that one place that feels like peace itself? For me, that's my lake at 6 a.m. glassy water. The same log where Grandpa Joe taught me to tell the difference between a bass strike and a bluegill nibble. His old tackle box still sits beside me, held together with duct tape, still smelling faintly of his cherry pipe tobacco. That's why I bought this property after my divorce. $485,000 for a quiet house, 1.2 acres, and the lake that carried my childhood memories. Every morning I cast from the same dock, drinking black coffee because, as Grandpa said, coffee's supposed to wake you up, not taste like dessert. This lake was my sanctuary, my reset button, my proof that life could be simple again, until she showed up. I heard the crunch of gravel behind me, measured heavy steps. I turned and saw her, Sandra White, HOA president, clipboard in one hand, measuring tape in the other, storming toward me like a sheriff about to serve a warrant. "Sir, you cannot fish here anymore," she announced. Like it was law, I laughed. "This is my lake. I literally have the deed in my kitchen drawer," but Sandra had paperwork. She knelt down, laid out official-looking documents with seals, stamps, and county references. According to her, the HOA had quietly purchased lake control rights for $50,000 last year. Under an old county water rule, the lake was now community property, and all fishing required HOA permits and fees. It looked real. Too real. When I pulled out my deed and showed her, she didn't care. Instead, she started photographing my rod, my tackle box, even my coffee mug, like they were evidence in a crime scene. Then she measured my dock with eerie precision, muttering about environmental violations. Finally, she handed me a citation. $2,500 for unauthorized recreational activity in protected community watershed, for fishing on my own property. At first, I thought she was bluffing, but when I checked, the old county water rule existed. The paperwork did check out. The county even confirmed it looked in order. A lawyer told me fighting it could cost $40,000 and drag on for a year with no guarantee I'd win. That's when I realized Sandra wasn't guessing. She knew exactly which loopholes to exploit, which offices to file with, and how to make everything look airtight. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was weaponizing them. And then the harassment began. New citations arrived almost daily. $800 for an unauthorized dock structure. $600 for improper storage of equipment. $400 for landscape changes affecting watershed. Even $300 for a so-called noise violation, because apparently me stirring sugar into my coffee at sunrise disturbed the peace. Every morning at 6 a.m., Sandra arrived with her tape measure and camera. The sound of her heels on my driveway became my new alarm clock. And the worst part, the neighbors, the same ones who used to smile and chat, now avoided me completely. Kids who used to watch me fish were suddenly pulled inside. Sandra was spreading rumors, calling me an environmental hazard and a litigious troublemaker. Within a week, I went from friendly fisherman to community pariah. By then, My fines totaled $4,700, and my peace was shattered. Then came my first win. My security cameras caught Sandra trespassing at 5:30 a.m., flashlight in hand, sneaking onto my dock, measuring and taking photos like some HOA ninja. Proof she wasn't just enforcing rules, she was stalking me. That's when Harold Carter, my neighbor, finally approached. Retired county clerk, 30 years of bureaucratic experience, a man who looked genuinely afraid. "Son," he whispered. Glancing around, "Sandra's done this before. 6 families in the last few years. She buries them in obscure regulations until they sell cheap and leave. Always the same pattern." And then he told me something that made my blood run cold. Her paperwork always looks perfect, but the timing is where she slips. The man had spent 3 decades navigating county bureaucracy, understanding the intricate dance of forms and procedures that make government function. His institutional DAR was pinging hard about Sandra's methods. "The government doesn't usually move this fast on anything," Harold explained, "but Sandra seems to have everything ready before she needs it. That's not how bureaucracy works, unless you're working the system from the inside." Around the same time, Jessica Wilson approached me with the nervous energy of someone about to commit espionage. Jessica's the HOA secretary and treasurer, works as a bank teller, and raises an 8-year-old daughter as a single mum. She's got that natural empathy that comes from dealing with difficult customers all day and raising a kid alone. "I think Sandra might be lying about something," Jessica said quietly, looking over her shoulder like Sandra might materialize out of thin air. She showed me her financial records, a $50,000 payment to Lake Management Company last year. I had to write the check, Jessica explained, but I never get confirmation from any lake company. Sandra said it was handled administratively, but my records show no FTLOB, no receipts, no contact information, just a payment to a company that might not exist. That's when Jessica dropped the bombshell that made everything click. Sandra pushed through the vote when only 3 board members were present. Harold was out of town visiting his sick brother, and Mike was at his daughter's graduation. It was just me, Sandra, and her 2 closest allies. She said it was urgent and needed immediate approval for county compliance. I trusted her expertise. The woman looked genuinely guilty, like she'd accidentally handed Nuclear Codesto a supervillain. I should have asked more questions, but Sandra always makes everything sound so official and necessary. My software engineer brain started connecting dots at light speed. Sandra wasn't running a simple power trip. She had constructed an entire business network. I found her Compensatored through public records like Easter eggs, neighborhood solutions, community services, property enhancement, generic names that sound legitimate but say absolutely nothing about what they actually do. Each company had mysteriously purchased houses from previous Sandra harassment victims. 6 houses bought substantially below market value. I ran the math, average savings per house around $40,000 times 6 houses equals $240,000 in profit for someone, with inside information about which families were about to be forced out. Sandra had weaponized the HOA into a property acquisition machine, and I was just the latest target in her systematic neighborhood harvesting operation. But in Sandra escalated to career destruction, and I realized this woman was genuinely dangerous. Job termination via email. Performance issues reported by community members regarding work-from-home reliability. 13 years with the company spotless record, multiple promotions, and suddenly I'm unemployable because Sandra doesn't like fishing. HR claimed neighbor observations showed I was absent during business hours, complete with attendance logs that someone with government connections could easily fabricate. The sophistication of her attack was breathtaking. She hadn't just attacked my finances and social standing, she'd attacked my identity as a professional. The woman understood that destroying someone's career doesn't just hurt them financially. It breaks their spirit and credibility in every other fight they might want to have. 3 days later, the foreclosure notice arrived like a guided missile aimed at my remaining hope. But when I opened that notice, one detail jumped out that made my heart race with a mixture of terror and possibility. The foreclosure company was exactly the same that had handled all 6 previous problem residents in our neighborhood. Same logo, same address, same corporate structure that had processed every family Sandra had forced out. This wasn't a coincidence. This was Sandra's systematic machine in action, and I was about to become victim number 7 unless I figured out how to break their pattern. Why was the foreclosure company the same one that handled all 6 previous problem residents in the neighborhood? My financial crisis was spiraling like a plane in a death dive, and Sandra was the pilot, gleefully pulling the stick down. Job searches failed because this woman's network had spread poison about my unreliable work habits faster than gossip at a church picnic. Unemployment benefits of $1,800 a month versus mortgage payments of $2,400. You don't need to be a mathematician to see how that story ends. I was burning through savings like a drunk sailor on shore leave, watching my carefully built financial security disappear into Sandra's manufactured legal nightmare. $31,000 left after lawyer consultations, credit cards creeping toward their limits, and the very real possibility of losing Grandpa's fishing spot for reversing me in the face. The stress was eating me alive. 15 pounds lost, sleeping 3 hours a night if I was lucky, and a nervous eye twitch that made me look like I was constantly winking at people. Whoa, definitely weren't in a flirting mood. I had to list the house for sale, which felt like selling my soul to Thedeville with a real estate license. And guess what happened? The only serious inquiry came from some mysterious company offering $290,000 for a house worth $45,000, wanting to close in 5 days with no inspection. Cash deal, take it or leave it. No questions asked about why I was selling so cheap and fast. The coincidences were stacking up like pancakes at a Sunday breakfast, and each one tasted more bitter than the last. I'm staring at this lowball offer thinking, this can't be random. The timing was too perfect, the terms too predatory, the whole situation too convenient for someone who might profit from a desperate homeowners forced into financial corners by systematic harassment campaigns. Harold Finale grew a backbone when he saw me stress fishing at dawn, looking like a man who'd lost everything that mattered in life. She got your job, too, didn't she? He asked, and the guilt in his voice was thick enough to cut with acne. That's when Harold opened up about his shameful history of watching Sandra's systematic destruction campaigns get destroyed while I stayed quiet like a coward. He confessed, wringing his hands like he was confessing murder to a priest. The Peterson family, the Washington family, the Smith family, all good people with kids and dreams, all gone because I was too scared to help. But Harold's institutional knowledge was exactly what I needed. 30 years of county bureaucracy meant he understood the intricate filing systems, the paper trail requirements, and most importantly, the digital fingerprints that government workers always leave behind, even when they're trying to cover up illegal activities. We started investigating like detectives on a cop show. Except, instead of chasing murderers, we were chasing a middle-aged woman with a clipboard and a criminal imagination. Harold's expertise, combined with my tech skills, created a reason that could dig through government databases like archaeologists hunting for buried treasure. What we found in county records made my software engineer brain explode with possibilities. The lake management company that supposedly got the HOA's $50,000. It never existed. Not in business registrations, not in tax filings, not even in the phone book. The payment went straight into Sandra's personal shell company accounts, complete with forged invoices that would fool anyone who wasn't looking for fraud. She created fake invoices, fake company registration, and stole community money, Harold explained, his voice shaking with anger. This isn't HOA overreach. This is criminal embezzlement with a governmental twist. Jessica's internal war was tearing her apart like she was being pulled by horses running in opposite directions. The woman desperately wanted to help expose Sandra's crimes, but she was paralyzed by the terror of retaliation against her daughter. Jessica's not a coward. She's a mother protecting her child from a predator who'd already demonstrated the power to destroy lives with phone calls. Sandra had been putting increasing pressure on Jessica through daily interrogations about loyalty to community leadership and subtle threats about financial irregularities that could cost Jessica her bank job. The psychological torture was surgical in its precision. Sandra never made direct threats, just implications that hung in the air like storm clouds. Are you sure you reviewed all those invoices carefully? Sandra would ask with fake concern. It would be terrible if there were any mistakes that might reflect poorly on your professional competence. When Jessica's 8-year-old daughter started asking, "Mummy, why do you look scared when Mrs. Sandra calls?" That's when Jessica realized this situation had infected her family life like cancer. The poor kid was picking up on her mother's stress, developing anxiety about phone calls and unexpected visitors. Jessica was trapped between protecting me and protecting her daughter's mental health, which is a choice no parent should ever have to make. But Jessica's procrastination wasn't weakness. It was a strategic survival instinct when dealing with someone who would turn neighbor harassment into a profitable art form. Meanwhile, Sandra's harassment campaign reached levels of creative absurdity. That would be impressive if it wasn't ruining my life. Daily violations for grass height measured with rulers, dock position calculated with surveyor equipment and fishing equipment, storage analyzed like it were radioactive waste disposal. The woman could find building code violations in the Garden of Eden. She convinced her board cronies to approve an emergency special assessment, $800 per household for legal defense costs. The beautiful irony, she was charging the community to fund her campaign against me. Neighbors started hating me even more because now I wasn't just the problem resident. I was costing everyone money just by existing. Sandra had weaponized their wallets against me, making them financial accomplices in their own manipulation. But Sandra Medeon, crucial mistake that gave me hope her legal facade had cracks. She cited the wrong environmental statute in violation 47. Instead of referencing the 1980s Watershed Protection Act, she quoted a 1970s pollution control law that didn't even apply to residential lakes. Harold caught it immediately with this bureaucratic expertise. She's working so fast to generate violations that she's getting sloppy. He observed Summy, who really understood these regulations, wouldn't make that kind of basic error. It was the first sign that Sandra's systematic approach might have weak spots we could exploit. Harold's records expertise revealed the smoking gun that changed our entire strategy. Sandra's Lake Authority filing was submitted after she collected the first round of fines from me. Computer logs don't lie about timestamps, and the digital evidence showed clear. She collected money under false pretenses, then tried to create legal authority retroactively, Harold explained, his hands shaking as he showed me the proof. This wasn't just civil HOA overreach anymore. This was criminal document fraud that could send someone to prison. Harold understood that we'd discovered something bigger than neighborhood politics. We'd found evidence of systematic criminal enterprise disguised as community, with Sandra leaving digital fingerprints all over the crime scene, like an amateur who thought she was smarter than the system she'd worked in for decades. The community pressure reached a breaking point at the next board meeting, where residents packed the room demanding I pay all fines to end this mess. 28 people showed up, highest attendance in our HOA's history, and 26 of them wanted my head on a platter. Sandra sat at the head table, looking like the voice of reason, fighting against one difficult resident who was selfishly destroying community harmony. This individual has cost our community thousands in legal fees and administrative overhead, she announced with perfect victim-playing tone. All he needs to do is follow the same rules as everyone else. The crowd murmured agreement like a lynch mob that had found its target. I was completely isolated, watching my neighbors turn into an angry crowd that blamed me for every problem Sandra had created. These were good people, parents, workers, retirees who just wanted peaceful lives. But Sandra had manipulated them into seeing me as the villain in her careful construct drama. The meeting descended into chaos, with people yelling at me to just pay up and shut up, while Sandra maintained her professional composure, like a conductor directing an orchestra of manufactured outrage. She had successfully turned the entire community against me, using their own money as ammunition, and they didn't even realize that they were funding their own manipulation. If you've ever felt completely trapped by someone in authority who seemed untouchable, drop a comment and let me know, because what I discovered next changed everything. That night, staring at the final foreclosure demand, 30 days to pay $18,000 or lose my house, one detail made my heart race. Why was Sandra's signature on the foreclosure paperwork as a community liaison? What kind of HOA president signs off on residents losing their homes? Harold's breakthrough insight hit me like lightning during one of our late-night research sessions. Surrounded by empty coffee cups and government documents scattered across my kitchen table like evidence from a crime scene. "Wait just 1 minute here," Harold said, squinting at county records through his reading glasses with the intense focus of a detective who had just found the missing piece of a murder case. The HOA did purchase legitimate lake rights for $50,000 a few years back, exactly like Sandra claimed they did. But here's what changes everything. The money never actually reached any legitimate lake authority. It went straight into Sandra's fake company bank account instead. The pieces started clicking together in my mind like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. "Don't you see?" Harold continued, his voice getting excited for the first time in weeks of depressing research. "The HOA owns real lake rights that they paid good money for. Sandra just stole the payment and has been illegally controlling those rights ever since. If we can prove fraud, we can force a sale of those rights." That's when the perfect solution crystallized in my brain like a mathematical equation solving itself. It needed to buy the HOA's actual lake rights that Sandra had been illegally controlling, like some kind of dictator with a fake badge. The financing decision felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, wondering if there was water or jagged rocks waiting below. I made the gut-wrenching choice to liquidate my retirement account early, accepting brutal tax penalties that left me with $78,000 after the government took its massive cut. Money that came from Grandpa's inheritance, carefully saved through Thurthus' entire working life. The emotional weight of spending family legacy money to protect our sacred fishing spot felt like carrying the hopes of 3 generations on my shoulders. My legal strategy was elegantly simple, but a refiningly risky offer. The HOA board, $65,000 to purchase the lake management contract they believed they owned. The problem, Sandra still controlled enough board votes to block any sale she didn't approve, which meant I was essentially asking permission from the person actively trying to destroy my weave. It felt like asking Dracula for permission to buy a wooden stake and some garlic. Sandra's panic when she detected my threat was immediate and vicious. Like watching a cornered wild animal realize its hunter had found its hiding place. Through her county computer access, she learned about my water rights inquiries within hours and launched a counterattack designed to annihilate me before I could implement my strategy. Her first devastating move was manipulating Jessica into signing a false statement, claiming I had harassed and threatened her during our conversations about Sandra's suspicious business practices. The threat Sandra made to Jessica was simple and terrifying. Sign this affidavit claiming Joshua stalked you, or face embezzlement charges for approving fake invoices that could send you to prison and cost you custody of your daughter forever. But Jessica found herself trapped between protecting me and protecting her child's future, an impossible choice that would haunt any parent's nightmares. I watched this sweet single mom get forced into betraying someone who was trying to help the community, all because Sandra wielded fear like a master swordsman. The temporary restraining order hit my life like a legal nuclear bomb designed to silence opposition. Based on Jessica's coerced statement and some suspiciously edited security footage, Sandra had somehow obtained a judge, issued an emergency order that legally isolated me from my own community. I couldn't attend HOA meetings where my fate was being decided, couldn't contact board members to present evidence of Sandra's crimes, and couldn't even approach neighbors to explain what was really happening. Sandra had weaponized the justice system itself, transforming courts designed to protect innocent people into her personal enforcement agency. Sometimes difficult residents need firm boundaries to protect community safety. She announced at the next meeting, where I was legally prohibited from defending myself. The woman had been playing 4-dimensional chess while I was still figuring out how checkers worked, and now I was trapped in a legal checkmate with no moves available. Harold's tremendous guilt about watching families get destroyed finally overcame his fear when he saw bulldozers arrive for preliminary site preparation, which was obviously intimidation disguised as construction. The sound of heavy machinery triggered panic attacks in Harold, bringing back traumatic memories of his own property destruction when Sandra had targeted his consulting business years earlier. You could see the PTSD written all over his face as those diesel engines roared to life. "I cannot watch this happen again," Harold told me, his hands shaking as he approached my house that evening. "I've stood by like a coward while good people got destroyed. Let me examine Sandra's original filing one more time with fresh eyes. There has to be something we missed." His expertise in government documentation was our last realistic hope, and Harold was finally ready to risk everything to stop Sandra's reign of terror. The man was 73 years old and willing to fight a war he should have fought years ago. That's when Harold discovered the smoking gun that would save my house and potentially send Sandra to federal prison. Sandra's original watershed. Designation filing showed computer timestamps that Provage had backdated government documents. A serious federal crime that could land someone in prison for years. "This isn't neighborhood politics anymore," Harold said, his voice trembling with righteous anger. "This is criminal fraud involving full-size government records. We could take this to the FBI if we need to." Harold's career in legitimate government receipts meant he understood exactly how serious document fraud was and what kind of legal consequences Sandra Fasadif, federal prosecutors, got involved. The sweet little HOA president who baked cookies for community events had just graduated from neighborhood bully to potential federal criminal. The irony was beautiful. She'd used the system so much that she'd left digital fingerprints everywhere. Her old detective work revealed Sandra's complete criminal timeline, and the scope was absolutely staggering in its calculated cruelty. Recent years, HOA votes to buy lake rights. Sandra diverts $50,000 to her fake company. Last year, Sandra began harassment campaigns, forcing 6 families to sell cheaply tortoiseshell companies. This year, Joshua becomes victim number 7, prime lakefront property worth huge profit potential if she could force me into financial desperation. Sandra had been running a multi-year real estate empire, using HOA authority as her collection agency, and I was just the latest victim in her systematic neighborhood harvest operation. The woman had turned community service into organized crime, and she was so good at it that nobody had noticed for years. Sandra detected my water rights application through her county connections and Tredo fast-track her own expanded community authority to block my purchase. She told board members that this resident is stringed to sabotage community water management and pushed for emergency measures to prevent my acquisition. But Sandra's overconfidence had led her to create extensive digital evidence. Everywhere she touched the system, Harold and I had compiled fake water authority invoices, backdated filing timestamps, and property purchase records that painted a clear picture of systematic fraud spanning multiple years. "We have enough evidence to put her in federal prison," Harold said with grim satisfaction. "But you can't present it due to that restraining order she manipulated the court into issuing." The woman had used her own legal weapon against herself by creating so much evidence while silencing the one person who could expose her. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, but I remained legally silenced by Sandra's restraining order manipulation. The irony was perfect. I had definitive proof of criminal behavior, but the criminal had used the legal system to prevent me from exposing her crimes. It was like having a video of a bank robbery, but being legally prohibited from showing it to the police. That's Harold made the bravest decision of his retirement. He would risk everything and present our evidence himself at the emergency board meeting. "I've been a coward for too long," Harold said, gathering our research files with hands that shook from determination rather than fear. "I've watched good people get systematically destroyed while I stayed safe in my garden, too scared to get involved. Not this time. This nightmare ends now, regardless of what it costs, me personally." But as Harold prepared for what could be the most important meeting in our neighborhood's history, had discovered one final piece of evidence so shocking that it would either save my house or result in Harold being sued into complete bankruptcy by a desperate criminal with nothing left to lose. What if Sandra wasn't just stealing from the HOA to help some outside developer make profits? What if she was actually the secret developer herself, personally buying all those foreclosed houses? Harold walked into that emergency board meeting like a man carrying the weight of moral responsibility on his shoulders. armed with a research folder thick enough to serve as evidence in a federal criminal trial. 28 residents showed up that evening, representing 38% turnout, which was absolutely the highest attendance in our HOA's recorded history because everyone wanted to witness how the controversial assessment situation would finally be resolved. Harold stood confidently at the community podium with more genuine determination than I'd seen from him during our entire months of research collaboration, looking directly into Sandra's eyes as he began his presentation with a steady, unwavering, "I've been carefully researching Sandra's water authority claims, using my 30 years of government experience," he announced at the packed room, "and I've discovered some extremely concerning irregularities that every resident needs to understand." He methodically spread out the comprehensive timeline documenting Sandra's systematic water authority fraud, plus her elaborate property acquisition scheme, presenting detailed financial records that definitively proved the HOA's $50,000 payment had been illegally diverted to Sandra's fake company accounts instead of any legitimate lake management authority. The community room fell into absolute dead silence as residents began to realize their trusted HOA president might actually be a sophisticated criminal who had been systematically robbing them for years. Jessica's moment of moral truth arrived when Harold's overwhelming evidence made it crystal clear that she would inevitably be implicated in serious fraud charges if she continued protecting Sandra's criminal lies through her silence, facing the impossible choice between enabling Sandra's continued crimes or protecting her innocent daughter's future from potential legal consequences. Jessica discovered inner courage she didn't know she possessed in such desperate circumstances. "I absolutely cannot let my daughter grow up knowing that I helped steal money from our neighbors when I had the power to stop it," Jessica declared, standing up in the middle of Harold's presentation with her voice shaking but her words completely clear and determined. Sandra systematically forced him to lie about Joshua through threats and intimidation. She explicitly threatened my job and my daughter's future if I didn't sign that false statement, accusing him of harassment and stalking. The packed community room erupted in shocked whispers and angry murmurs as residents finally realized their HOA secretary had been systematically coerced into lying by their own president. Jessica's public recantation meant the restraining order Rogan's me became immediately legally void, and for the first time in months, I could finally participate in defending Miss against Sandra's criminal accusations. The water rights vote happened with lightning speed before Sandra could mount any kind of coherent legal defense against the mountain of evidence Harold had presented, with Jessica's dramatic recantation completely exposing Sandra's systematic manipulation tactics and criminal intimidation methods. Harold immediately moved for an emergency vote to sell the HOA's legitimate lake rights to me for $65,000. Sandra's increasingly desperate opposition sounded more unhinged and irrational with every word she spoke as she frantically accused everyone present of obvious retaliation and criminal conspiracy against legitimate community leadership. But the financial mathematics were elegantly simple and appealing to every resident present. The HOA had originally paid $50,000 for water rights they never actually received due to Sandra's theft. I was offering $65,000 for rights their community actually owned, and everyone could clearly see the $15,000 profit opportunity that would benefit the entire neighborhood. The final vote passed decisively, with only Sandra and one remaining loyal crony voting against sale, while Jessica and the other board members voted enthusiastically to finally give their community some legitimate return on their stolen investment. Just like that, through a simple democratic vote, I officially owned the exact same lake management authority that Sandra had been illegally using to terrorize me and 6 other innocent families over the past several years. All of Sandra's previous citations and violation notices became completely meaningless under the law. She had never possessed any legitimate authority to issue them in the first place. My foreclosure proceedings were immediately stopped. All accumulated fines were legally cannelled, and suddenly owned the precise authority Sandra had been pretending to have while destroying lives for profit. "Sandra," I said, looking her directly in the eyes with the satisfaction of someone who had finally achieved justice, "I just bought legitimate lake rights you've been claiming to control illegally." The expression on her face was absolutely priceless, like watching a vampire suddenly realize it was standing in bright daylight. All that power she'd been throwing around so arrogantly, gone forever, poof. Her entire authority complex, built on criminal lies and systematic theft from her own community. But Harold's exhaustive research had revealed something even more shocking that was about to completely blow everyone's minds and transform our understanding of Sandra's true criminal nature. Sandra wasn't just some ordinary HOA president who had gotten carried away with petty neighborhood power. She was the secret developer behind all those suspicious property purchases that had destroyed multiple families. Harold had painstakingly traced the complex ownership structure through multiple companies and discovered that White Mountain Properties was the master criminal enterprise controlling. Sandra didn't work for some outside developer like we had initially assumed. She was running her own sophisticated property empire, systematically forcing out 6 different families over recent years to build a massive property portfolio worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen value. The sweet little HOA Karen, who baked chocolate chip cookies for holiday parties and volunteered at community events, was actually a ruthless property mogul who had been manipulating neighbors against each other for pure financial profit while maintaining her innocent facade. Have you ever discovered someone you trusted was playing a completely different game than you thought? Let me know in the comments, because this revelation was about to turn our entire neighborhood upside down, facing the inevitable exposure of her true criminal identity and the collapse of her elaborate deception. Sandra's carefully maintained professional mask finally slipped completely for everyone to witness. I worked 22 years in this county government building. The expertise to serve this community properly, she shouted desperately, abandoning any remaining pretense of reasonable community leadership or professional compass. I know exactly how to get things done legally and efficiently. Her frantic admission that she had deliberately created extensive management fees because communities absolutely need professional oversight to maintain property values completely horrified the residents, who had been unknowingly funding her systematic property acquisition scheme for years. Sandra had been literally robbing them blind through fake fees and manufactured decrees, while simultaneously convincing them she was protecting their financial interests and community welfare. The community quickly calculated that Sandra had illegally collected approximately $70,000 in completely fake fees, plus generated massive profits from systematically forced sales of 6 houses, building an entire criminal property empire using money stolen directly from the neighbors who trusted her leadership. The emergency vote of no confidence was swift, decisive, and absolutely devastating too. Sandra's remaining credibility in the community, the final tally was overwhelmingly conclusive. Only Sandra's sister and one remaining loyal crony continued porting her criminal behavior, while every other resident voted immediately to remove her from all HOA positions and ban her from future participation in community leadership. Jessica was unanimously elected as interim president with an explicit promise of complete financial transparency and mandatory monthly public reports of all HOA spending to prevent any future criminal abuse. We need to make absolutely sure this type of systematic theft never happens again to any community, Jessica announced with newfound confidence and determination. No single person should ever have this much control over our community's money without proper oversight and accountability. To residents demanded comprehensive audits of all Sandra's financial dealings over multiple years, an immediate restitution of every penny she had systematically stolen from community funds through her elaborate criminal schemes. Sandra out of that meeting screaming threats of revenge, but her desperate words sounded more like the ravings of Samayan facing inevitable criminal prosecution than genuine intimidation from someone with actual power remaining. "You people just made the biggest mistake of your lives," she shrieked as she reached the community room door. But as she got to her car in the parking lot, I noticed something that made me realize Sandra's threats weren't just empty words from someone who had lost all power. Why was there a construction company van parked across street that had been sitting in the exact same spot for 3 days? And why did the driver nod knowingly to Sandra as drove away into the night? Sandra's final, desperate gambit came at dawn the next morning, when the peaceful sound of birds chirping was suddenly replaced by the terrifying noise of heavy industrial machinery right outside my bedroom window. I rushed outside in my pajamas and coffee-stained robe to find professional contractors systematically my grandfather's sacred fishing dock with chainsaws and bulldozers, claiming they were performing emergency dock removal under legitimate safety authority. And the workers showed me Sandra's official-looking emergency safety order that appeared professional enough to confuse anyone who wasn't a specialized legal expert in municipal authority regulations. They had already cut completely through the main support beams when I arrived, actively destroying the dock where Grandpa had patiently taught me to tie proper fishing knots and cast accurate lines 25 years earlier. "Ma'am, I now legally own the water rights for this entire area," I told Sandra firmly, who was standing near B with her clipboard like she was conducting a symphony orchestra of systematic destruction. But Sandra just smiled with cold satisfaction and calmly produced her final emergency intervention documents, claiming she still retained authority to override any immediate safety hazards before the official authority transfer could be completed through proper bureaucratic channels. The legal standoff felt exactly like a tense Western movie, where nobody knows who's going to draw their weapon first, and somebody might end up dead before sunrise. I'm desperately waving my legitimate water rights contract in the air, while Sandra's confidently waving her suspicious emergency documents, and the professional construction workers are standing around with running chainsaws, wondering they should believe and obey. Sandra was loudly claiming I was trying to criminally obstruct legitimate safety procedures mandated by county emergency protocols, while I was frantically trying to explain that she no longer possessed any legal authority over my private property or community water management. The construction crew was getting paid substantial money either way, so they just kept cutting expensive wood while Sandra and I argued loudly about who was legally authorized to make binding decisions. That's when Harold arrived like cavalry in an old western, bringing along a township code official who took one professional look at both sets of conflicting paperwork and immediately confirmed that my recently purchased authority completely superseded any emergency claims Sandra might attempt to make. The chainsaws and bulldozers finally stopped to their destructive work, but unfortunately, half of my grandfather's dock had already been destroyed beyond any reasonable repair. The complete scope of Sandra's systematic criminal scheme became fully clear during the comprehensive county audit that followed our dramatic board meeting confrontation. Sandra had never transferred even 1 penny of the HOA's $50,000 payment to any legitimate lake authority like she had repeatedly claimed to community members. Every dollar had gone directly into her personal business accounts to fund her property acquisition empire. She had systematically collected additional money from trusting residents over recent years through completely fake compliance fees, convincing everyone they were paying for legitimate county requirements that would protect their property values. Her various shell companies had generated absolutely massive profits from 6 different below market house purchases, systematically targeting families she had personally harassed into complete financial desperation through calculated legal warfare. The total criminal scheme value was conservatively estimated at over $300,000. Systematically embezzled and illegally profited from our community over just a few years of elaborate deception. Sandra had successfully built an entire criminal real estate empire by weaponizing community trust and HOA authority against the very neighbors elected her to protect their interests. The special community meeting that followed, Sandra's exposure had highest resident attendance in our HOA's entire recorded history. 32 residents showed up that evening, representing 38% participation, which was completely unprecedented for our typical idiopathic community. Everyone wanted to personally witness Sandra face direct consequences for what she had systematically done to their community and their individual neighbors over multiple years. Residents expressed genuine fury when they calculated exactly how much money Sandra had systematically stolen through fake fees and manipulated property sales that had destroyed multiple families. Those were completely legitimate administrative for professional services provided to maintain community standards. Sandra insisted desperately, but absolutely nobody was willing to believe her transparent excuses anymore. After seeing overwhelming evidence of her criminal behavior, the community voted unanimously to pursue aggressive civil recovery of every stolen dollar and to permanently ban Sandra from any leadership position in the neighborhood. Her 22-year county government employment was immediately terminated for systematic misuse of official access and criminal breach of public trust, which means she could never work in government or licensed real estate anywhere in the entire county. Again, Sandra's professional destruction was remarkably swift and absolutely complete throughout the local government community. News of her elaborate criminal fraud spread through the county's extensive government employee network, faster than malicious gossip at a high school reunion, completely destroying her carefully built reputation among colleagues she had worked alongside. For over 2 decades, former friends and professional co-workers began actively avoiding her at grocery stores and public events, because nobody wanted to be personally associated with someone HOA had systematically robbed their own community while pretending to serve the public interest. Her expertise in bureaucratic manipulation and government procedure knowledge, which she had successfully used as a weapon against innocent neighbors for years, became completely worthless when everyone knew she was a convicted criminal who absolutely could not be trusted with any kind of official paperwork or financial responsibility. The woman who had built her entire professional identity around being the neighborhood's expert in professional oversight and community standards was now just another unemployed criminal trying to figure out how to pay basic rent and utilities. Jessica's remarkable transformation into a genuinely effective community leader was inspiring to witness after months of watching Sandra's authoritarian rule destroy neighborhood morale. She immediately implemented comprehensive transparency measures that made Sandra's secretive financial management look like organized crime in direct comparison. Monthly community meetings with completely open financial reports, public access to all HOA spending records available online, and mandatory resident oversight of any expenditure exchange. $100. Never again will one single person control our community's money without proper checks and balances, Jessica announced confidently at her first official meeting as Democratic-elected president. She established specialized committees for different neighborhood functions and implemented trend that all significant decisions needed approval from multiple people to prevent any future abuse. The HOA transformed from Sandra's personal criminal kingdom into an actual democratic community, organizing residents' genuine interests in just a few weeks. The civil judgment against Sandra was financially devastating, but entirely justified given the scope of her systematic crimes against multiple families. The court ordered her to immediately liquidate her entire criminal property portfolio and return substantial money to our victimized community, which meant selling off all the houses she had acquired through profits from systematically harassing innocent families. Sandra was forced to sell her primary residence to fund the court-ordered repayment plan, giving her a personal taste of the exact same financial desperation she had deliberately inflicted on 6 other families for pure profit. She lost all CHOA privileges permanently and was legally banned from running for any community leadership position anywhere in the county, which meant her days of systematically terrorizing neighborhoods were officially and permanently over. Watching her pack boxes and load a moving truck was like witnessing karma in perfect action. The woman who had forced others to sell cheap and lever their dream homes was now facing identical financial pressure and social ostracism. The final piece of evidence of Sandra's complete defeat was her response to the comprehensive court order and community judgment. Instead of showing any genuine remorse for the families she had systematically destroyed, or the community trust she had deliberately betrayed for profit, Sandra maintained her delusional victim complex right until the very end. It consistently protected property values and maintained professional community standards. She insisted during the civil proceedings, completely unable to acknowledge that she had been systematically robbing her neighbors for years while pretending to serve their interests. Even Sandra's final supporter, her own sister, publicly apologized to the community and withdrew all support when the complete scope of the financial fraud became undeniably clear. Sandra was completely isolated from all human support, facing the exact same social ostracism she had systematically used as a weapon against other families. Moving day arrived faster than anyone expected, and Sandra's desperate need to escape the neighborhood was obvious to everyone who witnessed her frantic packing. But when I saw what Sandra was carefully loading into that moving truck, I realized her criminal revenge plan was far from over. Why was she taking industrial measuring equipment and multiple file boxes clearly labeled with other neighborhood names? Was Sandra planning to start this exact same systematic scheme? Sandra's exit from our neighborhood was like watching a destructive tornado finally move on to terrorize someone else's community after leaving devastation in its wake. Her house sold quickly because she desperately needed immediate cash for court-ordered repayments and mounting legal fees. But the beautiful irony was that she had to accept the first reasonable offer instead of manipulating buyers through the same predatory tactics she'd used against her harassment victims for years. The new homeowners turned out to be a couple who absolutely loved watching me teach enthusiastic neighborhood kids proper fishing techniques every weekend. which felt like the universe's perfect way of saying everything was finally going genuinely okay. Sandra moved to a cramped apartment complex 25 minutes away with no lake access, no community to control, and absolutely no authority left to abuse for personal profit. Justice served ice cold with a side of perfect karma is definitely the sweetest kind of victory possible. Jessica's inspiring leadership completely transformed our HOA, from Sandra's personal criminal dictatorship into something that actually served the community's genuine interests and needs. Monthly financial reports are published online for complete transparency, resident oversight committees for Almager decisions, and absolute transparency about where every single dollar gets spent. I transferred seawater rights to a community trust with strong environmental protections that prevent any future abuse of authority. Then established the Grandpa Joe Memorial Fishing Program for neighborhood children to learn proper fishing techniques and water conservation. Harold volunteered enthusiastically as our community codes advisor to make absolutely sure nobody could ever again manipulate our financial systems the way Sandra had systematically done for years. Watching excited kids learn to cast their lines in the exact same spot where Grandpa had patiently taught me proper technique felt like his precious legacy was finally being honored and continued properly. The financial restitution process took 18 months of careful legal proceedings, but every single resident eventually received back every penny Sandra had systematically stolen through her fake fees and fraudulent assessments over multiple years. The community wisely used that money for playground improvements and beautiful walking trails that actually benefited everyone, instead of funding one person's criminal real estate empire built on neighbor property values rebounded by 15% after positive word spread. A better, stable, transparent leadership throughout the local real estate community. Agents actually started us and reformed HOA with proper oversight as a major selling point for houses. In our neighborhood, Sandra's systematic reign of terror had accidentally made our community stronger, more valuable, and more united than it had ever been before her criminal schemes. My personal victory felt even sweeter than I had imagined possible. When this entire nightmare first began with Sandra's surprise phishing citation, a respected tech company offered me a substantially higher salary, specifically because they were genuinely impressed by my integrity under extreme pressure during the prolonged fight against Sandra's systematic corruption and criminal harassment. My beloved lake became a cherished community gathering place. Every weekend with families enjoying peaceful picnics and children learning about environmental conservation from Harold's extensive expertise. The emotional payoff of feeling Grandpa's spiritual presence during sunrise fishing sessions reminded me exactly why this entire fight had been worth every sleepless night and every dollar spent on legal fees to protect family memories. Harold joined me most mornings for coffee and fishing. We had become genuine fishing buddies and research partners sharing stories and wisdom. While the sun rose over the water Grandpa had loved, Sandra's consequencer, exactly what someone deserves. After systematically destroying 6 families' financial futures and emotional well-being for pure personal profit, she worked a retail job at a furniture store to afford her court-awarded restitution payments, dealing daily with customers who sometimes recognized her as that haloddy who got arrested for fraud from news coverage. Former colleagues and neighbors actively avoided her in public because nobody wanted to be personally associated with someone who had betrayed an entire community's trust for money. Her reputation in county government circles was permanently destroyed. which meant she would never again have accessed the official information she had systematically used as a weapon against innocent people. The woman who had built her entire identity around controlling others was now powerless and socially irrelevant. 8 months later, Sandra drove slowly past our neighborhood during a community fishing tournament, and what she witnessed probably haunted her guilty conscience. 15 children learning to cast their lines properly, families enjoying peaceful picnics by the sparkling lake, Harold teaching water conservation to fascinated young minds, and me waving happily yell at neighbors who genuinely respected and appreciated my presence in their community. Joshua had transformed from being the problem resident into being a beloved community leader who had saved everyone from a sophisticated criminal. Sandra kept driving, because she understood she could never return to this level of genuine respect and community trust. The perfect ending came during a peaceful sunrise fishing session when Harold joined me with steaming coffee, exactly like Grandpa used to do decades earlier. "Think your grandfather would be proud of what you accomplished here?" Harold asked thoughtfully, settling into the comfortable chair next to mine. I cast me line toward the same fallen log where Grandpa had taught me patience and persistence 25 years earlier. Feeling his spiritual presence in the gentle morning mist rising off the calm water. Grandpa always said, "The best fishing spots are worth fighting for," I replied, watching my line settle peacefully into the crystal clear water. He just never mentioned, "You might have to buy the water rights to keep them safe." The rebuilt dock was stronger than before, featuring a beautiful memorial plaque reading Grandpa Joe's fishing spot. Teaching patience since 1998, true community spirit had been completely restored through collective action and one man's absolute refusal to let a criminal bully destroy precious family memories. Sometimes the best revenge is just being genuinely happy while your enemies definitely aren't. That's the story of how one Karen learned not to mess with the wrong neighbor, and how justice sometimes comes in the most unexpected ways. If this story of standing up to bullies made you smile, hit that like button. This is Echo Stories saying thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video where karma gets served ice cold once again. Asterisk. Thanks for listening.